Our first reading today comes from Genesis 37, 1 through 4, and 12 through 28. Jacob lived in the land of Canaan, where his father was an immigrant. This is the account of Jacob's descendants. Joseph was 17 years old and tended the flock with his brothers, while he was helping the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. Joseph told their father unflattering things about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was born when Jacob was old. Jacob made for him a long robe. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of his brothers, they hated him and couldn't even talk nicely to him. Joseph's brothers went to tend their flocks near Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, "Aren't your brothers tending the sheep near Shechem? Come, I'll send you to them." And he said, "I'm ready." Jacob said to him, "Go, find out how your brothers are and how the flock is, and report back to me." So Jacob sent him to the Hebron valley. Where he approached Shechem, a man found him wandering in the field, asking, "What are you looking for?" Joseph said, "I'm looking for my brothers. Tell me where they are tending sheep." The man said, "They left here. I heard them saying, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. They saw Joseph in the distance. Before he got close to them, they plotted to kill him. The brothers said to each other, "Here comes the big dreamer. Now, come on, let's kill him and throw him to the cisterns. And we'll say a wild animal devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." When Reuben heard what they said, he saved them by telling them, "Let's not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Don't spill his blood. Throw him into the desert cistern, but don't lay a hand on him." He intended to save Joseph from them and take him back to his father. When Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped off Joseph's long robe, took it and threw it into the cistern, an empty cistern with no water in it. When they sat down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with camels and carrying sweet resin, medicinal resin, and fragrant resin on their way to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What do we gain if we kill our brother and hide his blood? Come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not harm him because he's our brother, our family." His brothers agreed. When some Midianite travelers passed by, they pulled Joseph out of the cistern. They sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. The second reading today comes from Matthew 14, 22 through 33. Right then, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side of the lake, where he dismissed the crowds. When he sent them away, he went up onto the mountain by himself to pray. Evening came and he was alone. Meanwhile, the boat, fighting a strong headwind, was being battered by the waves and was very far away from land. Very early in the morning, he came to his disciples walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." They were so frightened, they screamed. Just then, Jesus spoke to them. "Be encouraged, it's me, don't be afraid." Peter replied, "Lord, if it's you, order me to come to you in the water." And Jesus said, "Come." Then Peter got out of the boat and was walking on water towards Jesus. But when Peter saw the strong wind, he became frightened and he began to sink, shouting, "Lord, rescue me." Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him, saying, "You man of weak faith, why did you have doubts?" When they got into the boat, the wind settled down. Then those in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, "You must be the Son of God." The word of God for the people of God. So, many years ago, there was a woman who decided to enter the convent. Now, it was hard for her after college to give up so much of the material world that she had come to enjoy and take for granted. But it was time, she decided, for her to appreciate long walks instead of afternoons at the movies. The hardest thing was letting go of her friends and the immediate access that she had to them. Now, she knew that everything else would become less important. She would be able to live on a reasonable budget. except for her phone bill. There were all sorts of things that decreased in importance, from shampoo to toothpaste, but giving up the phone bill, well, that was a different thing altogether. To admit to the novitiate director that she was unable to ignore a phone call, well, that would be difficult. She did a good job hiding her struggle for about 6 months. Her access to the past, though, was too difficult for her to overcome. It came one day when her phone bill was more than her allowance that the problem came to a head. She prayed to God for help with the dilemma that she had put herself in. And it was within 24 hours that the dilemma was seemingly solved. She pulled a sweater from her closet, and she found a gold eagle coin with a value of $278. She asked the director if anybody knew whose it was. She contacted the previous occupant of the room. No one knew or had seen anything before. After some financing and actually fessing up to the novitiate director that she had a problem, she was able to solve everything without selling the coin, but she always has kept the coin since, that no prayer goes unanswered, so she would be reminded. Now, Christ's miracles are my favorite part of the Gospels. For some reason, they show that even when we're in the worst situation, when we have nothing going for us, we're never alone. If we sit down and think about how large of a miracle it truly was that Peter walked on water, it will really overwhelm us. Now, I know I've seen the episode of Mythbusters where they try to make themselves walk on water. Has anybody seen that episode? So, one person. So, they do everything to try to be able to walk on water. That's their job, right? They make themselves boat shoes. They try to run across the water really fast. And they fail. Until finally, they just add a bunch of cornstarch to the water and make silly putty, which is no longer water, is it? Really, all they had to do was read this week's gospel passage, and they would have gotten all the answers they needed. Although, if we're honest, doubting is really what the Mythbusters do best, isn't it? That's what they're paid to do, to have doubts. I know I have trouble trusting in the Lord to provide from time to time. As I read the story of this novitiate nun, I think about the solutions to her problem. And I will tell you that prayer is not one of the solutions that I thought of for her problem. It's difficult to admit when we have doubts, isn't it? It's difficult to admit those doubts to God, especially, because we want to solve our own problems. We even go so far as to give advice to God, don't we? I know that there's at least one famous preacher who talks about when he was young, making flow charts while he was in prayer, telling God what he wanted to do and the timeline for when it should happen. Now, Peter is in one of those moments in his life when he's being called on to place trust in Jesus. Now, when he steps out of that boat, he has placed everything, all of his trust in Jesus, and he's walking on water. Then as he begins to think about it, think about what's happening, thinking about how impossible it is, the water pulls him down, and he begs Jesus to rescue him. Now, when they return to the boat, we know everything calms down miraculously. Peter trusted, but not enough. And Jesus was still there for him. This is a wonderful reflection of how we can always count on God to be there for us. Now, I'm sure we could find hundreds of examples, if not thousands, of people who are so perfect in their ability to trust God that it would make you want to shake your head and wonder, how on earth do they do that? But to find someone who has doubt, a believer who struggles with their giving faith over to God, but still does it, that's rare. Now, I watched a film the other day, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, but it's one of those films that even made me cry, which means that it's really sad. How many of you have seen Miracles from Heaven with Jennifer Garner? Now, this is one of those movies that I wasn't too interested in watching, but I think it was on the television, and I got drawn in. So, I didn't know what to expect, really, but I didn't expect what I got. It centers on a family from Texas, and shortly after the film begins, this daughter, this little girl who's like 10 years old, gets ill with a disorder that makes it hard for her body to process food. So this young child is in constant pain, and her mother attempts to get her treatment, and doctors ignore her. Eventually, as the film progresses, they go to church, and members of the church walk up to them and ask if there's any unresolved sin in the life of the mother, her husband, or even the little girl. Now, that seems to be the last straw for the mom. At that point, she goes to Boston to try to get her treatment at this exclusive doctor. As we progress in the movie, the mother loses her ability to trust in God. And even at that, the little girl tells her roommate not to be afraid to die because God is with them. Now, if you want to know how the film ends, I recommend that you check it out. Throughout the whole film, I found myself not identifying with the husband who said, "Trust in God." Not identifying with the little girl who soldiered on even through the most impossible of circumstances. No, to me, the mom being angry seemed reasonable. It seemed reasonable to be upset at the situation her daughter was in. It isn't reasonable, though, sometimes, Faith, is it? It isn't reasonable to go and get a Master's of Divinity in the 21st century church. It isn't reasonable for us to wake up every Sunday morning and come to church. To do what? To sing songs to God, to hear someone speak about a passage that you've heard about a million sermons on. It isn't reasonable for us to pursue life as a community when society is telling us that what makes us different is more important than what makes us the same. But if you've ever read the Bible, you will find out one important thing about God. God isn't reasonable, is he? God isn't reasonable at all. God is not ruled by what we think of as reason. God's ways are not our ways. We're told to have the faith of a child in Scriptures for a reason. And that's because every child will trust you implicitly until they're given a reason not to, or taught another way. I know that each and every one of us has the ability to have the faith of a child somewhere in our hearts. This passage reminded me of just that sort of story. Now, this was a joke that I read in a boy's life when I was young. And you might have heard this before, but there's a family. And everybody in the family goes out into the middle of the lake and walks on water on their 13th birthday. And so this little girl, let's call her Maria, decides on the morning of her 13th birthday, I'm going to go out into the middle of the lake and I'm going to walk on water. So she gets into the boat. She paddles to the middle of the lake. And she steps out of the boat. And splash. She gets soaking wet. So she climbs back into the boat, and on the dock she sees her family, all pointing and laughing. She says, "What did you do to me? Why wasn't I able to do that?" And they said, "Maria, I was born in December." And it goes down the line. They all had winter birthdays. Honey, it's July. Why did you think you could walk on water? We're called to let go of our doubts sometimes, even when it's difficult. Whether it's about finances, our health, our faith, we're called to have the faith of a child, the faith of a child who knows that a loving Father is with them always. So when we leave here today, I challenge all of us to leave our doubts behind. Amen.